One of the things we talk about a lot on the Spector Creative channel is action figures and scale, meaning the size of an action figure proportionate to an actual human being or car or real world thing. There's a lot of different reasons that people collect different toys at different proportions, at different scales. And, well, some of those scales permit what's called different play patterns, which are the way children and adult collectors engage with toy product. Now, some of them are clearer than others. Some toys are obviously played with in certain ways, and others it's not so obvious. And I want to go through some of the, more traditional scales and talk a little bit about how they differ. Now, I'm not going to talk as much about Lego here as far as a scale of action figures. Well, this is technically an action figure, a minifigure, if you will. It's really an accessory, and that's actually legally how it's defined. It's how Lego is able to make articulated Darth Vader figures outside of the Hasbro license, because they're meant to be accessories to Lego sets. They're not really meant to be played with by themselves, even though obviously they can be. Obviously, a Lego minifigure is close to our first category, which is just the minifigure in general. So there's two types of minifigures. There's the ones that are articulated and the ones that are not. Unarticulated figures tend to be more accessories for play sets or vehicles. It's what's really thought of as dollhouse play, where you have the figurine, whether it's a Darth Vader or a doll, or it could be anything, but it's really just meant to be accessory isn't quite the word, but a complement to a larger toy would be the way to think of it. Action Fleet is a great example. You wouldn't, you could, of course you can collect those little figures, but as a parent, you're purchasing them as a accessory for something larger. They're seen as added value. You're not only getting a play set, but look, hey, the play set comes with all these little figurines with faces, and that's how children relate to the world, through things with faces on them. And it obviously allows them to dollhouse play, which is the play pattern of essentially setting characters up and moving through their daily routine, like how every day Darth Vader chops off his son's hand. Okay, maybe not, but in play it can. These figures can be made of metal, and in very traditional play they are, but plastic is also common, especially today with prices the way they are, going up and up. And of course they are collectible and fall into that other play pattern of just being collectible product. Collectible is a play pattern. Children collect everything from rocks to sticks to high-end ostrich feathers. All right, the next category up from your general minifigure is what's thought of as your sort of called super deformed or squishy form factor, where you have a character that is an interpretation of a character from content or real life, and usually the features are slightly exaggerated one way or another. At the smaller scales, they tend to be in the collectible only category. Obviously, kids can dollhouse play with these, but through the blind bag play or selling, if you will, the fact that you don't always know who you're buying, and the fact that there's a huge variety, it tends to specifically encourage that collectability or collect 'em all mentality that's, again, just as strong with kids and their ostrich feathers as it is with us. Super deformed figures are offered by many companies, some with features, some without. Sometimes they are part of larger planograms that do include playsets and vehicles, but they're very collectible because of the super deformed nature of the sculpt, that they have a proprietary look. Pop is probably one of the best examples. So these are essentially collectible. You put them on your shelf, kids and adults. I mean, there are kids who will play with these like action figures, but because of the lack of articulation and because of the super deformed nature, meaning the limbs, the heads, the eyes, in the case of Pop, have a proprietary visual look. And obviously, while Pop tends to be the industry leader, there are a lot of, call them imitators, that have come out over the years, where the idea of a non-articulated, sort of proprietary reimagining of a character in a form factor. All right. So now that we're off of sort of non-articulated figures, let's talk about articulated figures. And there are minifigures that are articulated, like those Action Fleet ones, and I'm not going, every possible scale. I'm sort of covering the main ones, and 3 3/4 is obviously a major scale for action figures. It didn't start with Star Wars, but Star Wars did kind of make it very famous, more or less. The scale was designed to be compatible with vehicles, and we've obviously gotten lots of action figures in the 3 3/4 scale from lots of different brands. I'm using Star Wars and Darth Vader here as an example throughout the video, simply because Darth Vader has had so many toys made of him. He makes a good visual. Now, I'm not just 3 3/4 can also include things that are, a little bigger, like 4-inch, and they can, they're not just necessarily blister carded figures. They can come in gift packs. They can have features. They can have swappable parts. They can have action features. They can have magnets. They can just have a lot of articulation. There's many different ways of executing a 3 3/4, but the main play pattern for years has been vehicle play. The idea that a 3 3/4 figure is scaled to put into what originally was an affordable vehicle for mom and dad to buy for their kid. And the idea that the figure could easily fit in, pull in and out, that was the play pattern, and that was how children felt control over the ship and how they saw the character as an avatar for themselves. By being able to place it inside of the cockpit, it's like you're flying the spaceship. And that's why spaceships or vehicles and action figures have paired so well, because of the play pattern that they naturally foster within each other, where you have a vehicle, a playset that the characters can move around in an environment and or fly. Now, the problem with 3 3/4 is the cost. They used to be the gold standard for being vehicle compatible, but not so much anymore, really just due to labor costs, production costs, material costs. Something like this, a 3 3/4 X-Wing, right, your basic vehicle, is $100. Well, flash back to just a few years ago, and you could get the exact same thing for about $50. And that illustrates exactly why 3 3/4 is struggling as a kid line. And the natural heir, at least in Star Wars as a brand, has been Mission Fleet. Essentially, Hasbro just shrunk the figures and shrunk the vehicles in order to create a price point that actually can sell both. Selling 3 3/4 compatible vehicles and playsets has become, well, difficult simply because of pricing. So, just by shrinking it and making the figures smaller, it's the exact same play pattern that 3 3/4 figures have had for decades, but now in a more affordable way, simply because, well, unfortunately, we're now at a time when 3 3/4 is no longer affordable. All right, let's jump up to 6-inch. 6-inch is an interesting scale because it really celebrates the character, the figure themselves. It's much harder to do vehicles and world building at this scale, simply because if 3 3/4 has already outpaced the ability to do playsets and vehicles, you can imagine 6-inch makes it even more difficult. The larger the figure, the larger the vehicle. You can obviously plus up a 6-inch figure by adding any number of extras, different piece count, different executions, but really for most collectors buying this, at least, you could really just get a statue, because the figure is going to sit on your shelf and not move. So it really doesn't matter, whether or not it's compatible with a vehicle or a larger play pattern. For most collectors, you're going to pose it, which is why articulation is important. It's also why things like the Rancor from HasLab didn't fund, because 6-inch is very difficult to world build. It takes up a lot of space and it's expensive. It's why he was, $300, etc. plus $350. I forget. I didn't buy one. Vehicles can be done, but again, they're huge, they're expensive, and honestly, they usually wind up on clearance because of that. That's why you need smaller play patterns, or rather smaller scales, in order to be compatible with vehicles. And again, it's why the Mission Fleet is the natural successor to the traditional 3 3/4 Kenner Star Wars ship, if you will. I know I'm making extrapolations for the entire industry by constantly talking about Star Wars. All right, 12-inch. So 12-inch is an interesting one because it has huge appeal to both kids, collectors, and parents. Now, you might say, well, why is that? They're definitely not vehicle compatible, obviously. I mean, there have been vehicles for 12-inch figures, but they're like redonkulously huge and pretty expensive to buy, especially these days. Well, the thing about a 12-inch figure is that it has a lot of play value, and it can either be done high-end or very low end, meaning for a parent looking to buy a basic toy, if they buy a 12-inch figure, they're going to be getting a ton of value. The same with a collector. It's a scale that allows more detail. It allows, you can have, cloth outfits that actually hang and fold the way they would on the actual actor or in the content and the source material. Masks are easier to sculpt removable because of the size. And most importantly, and for parents and kids, it's a scale that permits action features, light up, twist waist, sounds, all of that. Because of the size of 12-inch, the body can basically house a mechanism, battery compartments that don't alter the sculpt. Just look at some of those early FX Star Wars Kenner power figures from the 90s with giant humps on their back to keep the backpacks. That's why 12-inch is needed, and it's why price value is there. So for mom, for dad, for grandma, for aunt and uncle buying a toy, a basic low-cost 12-inch figure gets you a lot for your money. You feel like you're getting a lot of value, and hopefully the child you're buying this for is going to enjoy the toy. For the collector, the 12-inch form factor permits greater amount of articulation and greater amount of detail and authenticity that you just can't get with a smaller scale, well, basically simply on size. There's a limit to how much detail and paint ops you can do on a mini figure, or a 3 3/4 figure, or even a pop. But at 12-inch, you're more or less unlimited. You're dealing with a scale that's much easier to paint. You can afford to include a ton of accessories, different hands, different heads, different weapons, different bases, cloth outfits, etc., etc., just simply because the larger scale, it makes it much more easily to paint and to build. It really winds up being a museum piece. If it's not a kid toy that's giving price value, for a collector, if you're buying something, a high-end 12-inch, we're really talking about something that's going to be displayed probably in a museum-esque environment in your office. All right, well, 12-inch is obviously not the largest scale that you can buy action figures in, and they do come even bigger than that. When I worked at Jakks Pacific on their Big Figs line, I had a lot of experience dealing with very large action figures. And we actually struggled a lot with what was the rationale, what was the reason for having this really large Darth Vader figure, as an example. And while it does seem like it's kind of got that wow factor, and it definitely brought in publicity, well, there was a lot of thought. I was like, well, who's actually going to buy this? The conclusion for the way it was promoted to market, to retailers, what it was kind of, my Darth Vader, my Stormtrooper, my buddy. It was actually also done as a door alarm, where if you walked in, it would sound off, was the action feature. Well, as cool as these are, and, giant, figures that are very eye-catching, that's really all they were at the end, is eye-catching. Lots of toy companies, including Jakks, knew with Episode 7 there was going to be the chance for a lot of eyeballs on their product. And these figures were much more about drawing people into the aisle, having kids explore, and pulling them into the Star Wars area. Proof in the pudding is the fact that they went on clearance pretty quickly after the movie, and for a giant figure, yeah, you weren't paying much. The last scale is, well, are you going to call these action figures? We're talking about life-size figures. And there's multiple companies that make these. And there's multiple form factors that these are found in. You can buy a Darth Vader both as a giant 6-inch version of the toy you had as a kid in the 80s, or you can buy an authentic one that actually looks like Darth Vader's hanging out in your room, or, I don't know, sauna? Where would you put a giant Darth Vader? Either way, if having a prop replica of an entire figure is what you want, well, some characters are available. But to say this is an action figure, well, it's much more of like, owning a luxury item like a car. Yes, you could consider a car a sort of adult toy, but we're really not talking something that's going to be played with at all. And hey, it's all about acquisition. He who dies with the most toys clearly has the most toys, and lots of different ways to buy them, play with them, and enjoy them. I hope this video clarified a little bit about what different scales offer toy makers, kids, collectors, parents, retailers. If you like it, please do share it with others. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below, and I'll see you next time.